In the cold void between stars, where mercy is weakness and compassion is folly, the galaxy learned why humanity named their hospital ships after virtues instead of victories. They thought our healing hands made us soft. They discovered our gentle hearts housed the fury of 1,000 suns. When the Vraish Consortium made their fatal mistake, targeting the medical vessel Hippocrates carrying wounded civilians from 3 species, they awakened something the galaxy had whispered about in dark corners, but never truly understood. The terrible wrath of a species that would burn the universe to ash before letting evil triumph over innocence. This is the story of how Earth's children reminded the cosmos that those who heal can also destroy. And sometimes the greatest act of mercy is the complete annihilation of cruelty itself. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the cool metal bulkhead of the Hippocrates and felt the gentle thrum of the medical ship's engines. The massive vessel drifted through the Kepler Nebula like a beacon of hope, its white hull marked with red crosses visible even in the swirling cosmic dust. 3 years into her assignment aboard humanity's most advanced hospital ship, Sarah still marveled at the engineering marvel that housed over 10,000 patients from dozens of species. The Hippocrates stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its modular design allowing for specialized medical bays tailored to different alien physiologies. The thermal wing maintained the scorching temperatures required for the crystalline Zelthari patients, while the cryogenic section kept the ice-dwelling Frostborn in their natural sub-zero environment. Between these extremes, hundreds of other environmental zones catered to the medical needs of the Galactic Alliance's diverse membership. Sarah's rounds began in the pediatric ward, where young beings from across the galaxy recovered from various ailments. A small Aquarian child, her gills fluttering weakly in the specially designed water-breathing apparatus, reached out with a webbed hand as Sarah approached. The child's translator device chirped softly, conveying her gratitude in the musical language of her underwater homeworld. "Dr. Chun, the pain is gone," the young patient said, her large eyes reflecting the soft blue light of her medical bay. "When will I see my parents again?" Sarah knelt beside the containment unit, her movements careful and practiced. The Aquarian child had been pulled from a wreckage of a civilian transport that had suffered catastrophic decompression near the Rigel system. Her injuries were severe, multiple fractures to her delicate bone structure, and extensive damage to her breathing apparatus. Without immediate medical intervention, she would have died within hours. "Very soon, little one," Sarah replied, checking the readouts on her medical scanner. The bioregeneration therapy was working perfectly, restoring the child's damaged tissue at the cellular level. "The Mercy Fleet is already coordinating with your homeworld. Your parents know you're safe." The concept of the Mercy Fleet was uniquely human. While other species maintained military medical corps attached to their war vessels, humanity had created an entirely separate armada dedicated solely to healing. The Hippocrates was the flagship of this humanitarian force, but dozens of smaller medical vessels spread across Alliance space, responding to emergencies without regard for politics, species, or territorial boundaries. Sarah moved through the ward, checking on other young patients. A Gorvok child, his rocky hide scarred from a mining accident, played with holographic building blocks that helped exercise his healing limbs. Nearby, twin ethereal younglings floated in their energy-dampening chambers, their naturally volatile electrical fields carefully regulated while their bodies recovered from an industrial accident on their homeworld. The diversity of patients aboard the Hippocrates told the story of humanity's rapid integration into galactic society. When Earth had first made contact with the Galactic Alliance 50 years ago, humans were considered a curiosity, a species that had developed advanced medical technology while maintaining what other races saw as primitive emotional attachments to concepts like compassion and altruism. Most galactic civilizations approached medicine with cold efficiency. The Zoridi treated healing as a commercial transaction. The militant Vraish viewed medical care as a weakness that diluted the strength of their warrior culture. Even the peaceful elders of Centauri managed their medical systems through complex bureaucratic hierarchies that often delayed treatment for optimal resource allocation. Humans approached medicine differently. They saw healing as a moral imperative that transcended species, politics, and profit. This philosophy had initially been met with skepticism by Alliance leadership, but the effectiveness of human medical teams quickly silenced critics. Human doctors and nurses demonstrated an unusual ability to treat not just physical ailments, but also to provide emotional comfort that accelerated healing across all species. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Hippocrates chief medical officer, often explained this phenomenon to visiting alien dignitaries as the human healing factor. It wasn't just their technology, though that was certainly advanced. It was their approach, treating each patient as an individual worthy of complete care rather than as a collection of symptoms requiring correction. Sarah completed her rounds in the pediatric ward and made her way to the trauma center, where the most severely injured patients received intensive care. The massive space occupied 3 full decks of the ship, with specialized surgical suites, regeneration chambers, and experimental treatment facilities. Here, the quiet efficiency of human medicine was on full display. Nurse Captain James Morrison coordinated the movement of medical teams with military precision. His background as a combat medic in Earth's final territorial conflicts had prepared him for the organized chaos of emergency medicine on a galactic scale. Under his direction, human and alien medical staff worked seamlessly together, their movements choreographed through years of training and shared experience. "Dr. Chun, we have an incoming priority case," Morrison called as Sarah entered the main treatment area. Long-range sensors picked up a distress beacon from a research vessel near the Horsehead Nebula. Severe radiation exposure, multiple casualties. Sarah nodded and began preparing for the incoming patients. This was the reality of service aboard the Hippocrates. Constant readiness to respond to emergencies across Alliance space. The ship's advanced warp drive allowed it to reach most systems within days, but even that speed sometimes meant arriving too late for the most critically injured. The research vessel Stellar Pioneer limped into the medical ship's docking bay 40 minutes later, its hull scarred by cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. The ship's crew of 12 included representatives from 6 different species, all suffering from various degrees of radiation poisoning after their vessel's shielding failed during a close solar observation mission. Sarah worked alongside Dr. Kethvar, a Zelthani physician whose crystalline body structure made him naturally resistant to radiation. Together, they stabilized the most critical cases while other medical teams began comprehensive treatment protocols. The diversity of patients required careful coordination. What healed a Gorvok's rock-like hide could prove toxic to a Zelthani's crystalline matrix, while treatments safe for humans might prove fatal to the aquatic Nereid crew members. The emergency response highlighted everything that made the Hippocrates unique. Other species might have triaged the patients based on treatment efficiency or survival probability. The human medical staff treated all patients with equal intensity, adjusting their approaches to maximize survival across all species types. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the ship's chief xenobiologist, had spent years developing treatment protocols that could be safely applied across species lines. Her research into universal healing principles had revolutionized Alliance medical practice, but more importantly, it embodied the human belief that all sentient life deserved the best possible care. As the emergency response wound down and the Stellar Pioneer's crew stabilized in various treatment wards, Sarah found herself in the ship's observation lounge, looking out at the swirling colors of the Kepler Nebula. The cosmic gas clouds painted space in shades of blue and gold, their beauty a stark contrast to the medical emergencies that filled her daily life. Lieutenant Commander David Park, the ship's senior communications officer, joined her at the observation window. Park's role extended far beyond managing the ship's communication systems. He served as liaison between Hippocrates and the various Alliance fleets that provided security for medical operations. Another successful save, Park observed, settling into a chair beside Sarah. Though I notice we're getting farther from Alliance patrol routes with each mission. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The Hippocrates operated under special protocols that allowed it to respond to medical emergencies anywhere in known space, regardless of territorial boundaries or political tensions. This freedom of movement was essential to their humanitarian mission, but it also carried risks. Dr. Webb mentioned increasing Vraksh activity in this sector, Sarah said. Their expansion has been aggressive lately. The Vraksh Consortium represented everything antithetical to human medical philosophy. Their warrior culture viewed weakness as a fatal flaw to be eliminated rather than a condition to be healed. Vraksh society was built around concepts of strength, conquest, and the elimination of inferior beings. They maintained minimal medical infrastructure, preferring to allow the weak to die rather than waste resources on healing. Recent intelligence reports suggested the Vraksh were expanding their territorial claims into previously neutral sectors. Their fleets have been spotted near Alliance medical facilities, leading to concerns about potential interference with humanitarian operations. The Alliance Council assured us that medical vessels remain neutral under all circumstances, Park said, though his tone suggested less confidence than his words. The Vraksh have signed the Medical Neutrality Accords. Sarah knew the theory well enough. The Medical Neutrality Accords were considered one of the Galactic Alliance's greatest diplomatic achievements, establishing that medical vessels and humanitarian missions would be considered neutral in any conflict. Every major civilization had signed the agreement, including the Vraksh Consortium. But theory and practice often diverged in the cold reality of space. The Vraksh had signed the accords under political pressure, not out of any genuine respect for medical neutrality. Their compliance with humanitarian law had always been reluctant and incomplete. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's general communication system activated. Captain Michelle Torres' voice filled the observation lounge with calm authority. All senior staff to the bridge. We have received a priority distress signal. Sarah and Park made their way to the bridge, where they found the senior staff already assembled. Captain Torres stood before the main display screen, her expression grave as she reviewed the incoming data. Behind her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements reflecting the discipline that made the Hippocrates one of the most respected vessels in the Alliance fleet. "We received a medical emergency beacon from the civilian transport Harmony," Torres announced. The vessel was carrying refugees from the Altair colony dispute, families with children, elderly, and wounded from both sides of the conflict. The Altair situation had been developing for months. A territorial dispute between two minor Alliance species had escalated into limited warfare, creating thousands of refugees who needed medical care and safe transport to neutral systems. The Harmony was one of several civilian vessels operating under Alliance protection to evacuate the most vulnerable civilians. "What's the nature of the emergency?" Dr. Webb asked, his medical scanner already active as he began preparing for potential casualties. Torres highlighted the distress signal's technical specifications on the main screen. Critical life support failure and what appears to be weapons damage. The Harmony reported being attacked by unknown vessels approximately 6 hours ago. They managed to escape, but their medical bay is overwhelmed and they have multiple critical casualties. The situation was exactly the kind of emergency the Hippocrates was designed to handle. The ship's massive medical facilities could accommodate hundreds of additional patients, while its advanced surgical suites were capable of treating injuries beyond the capability of most civilian medical systems. "Set course for the Harmony's position," Torres ordered. "Maximum sustainable speed. Dr. Webb, prepare for mass casualty reception." As the Hippocrates adjusted course and accelerated toward the distress transport, Sarah felt the familiar combination of anticipation and determination that marked the beginning of a major medical operation. This was what she had trained for, what had driven her to request assignment aboard humanity's flagship medical vessel. The Harmony appeared on their sensors 3 hours later, its hull showing clear evidence of weapons damage. Scorch marks from energy weapons scarred the transport sides, while several sections showed the characteristic puncture patterns of kinetic projectiles. Whoever had attacked the civilian vessel had done so with military-grade weapons and obvious intent to cause maximum damage. The sight sent a chill through the bridge crew. Attacks on civilian vessels were rare in Alliance space, particularly on ships carrying medical evacuees under humanitarian protection. The presence of weapons damage suggested either pirates or military action, both of which violated numerous Alliance treaties and conventions. This wasn't random piracy, Lieutenant Commander Park observed grimly. Those weapons patterns suggest coordinated military assault. As the Hippocrates prepared to dock with the damaged transport, long-range sensors detected something that made everyone on the bridge pause. Energy signatures consistent with Vrake's warships were moving through the system's outer regions, their emission patterns indicating they were running with minimal power to avoid detection. Captain Torres studied the sensor readings with growing concern. The Vrake's fleet presence in this neutral sector was a violation of Alliance territorial agreements, but more troubling was their apparent attempt to remain hidden while civilian vessels were under attack. Sarah watched the tactical display and felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. The Harmony's attack, the Vrake's fleet presence, the timing of the medical emergency. Too many coincidences were adding up to something deliberately orchestrated. The medical ship completed its docking procedures with the damaged transport, and Sarah joined the emergency medical teams preparing to receive casualties. Whatever was happening in this isolated sector of space, their immediate priority remained the same: save every life possible. But as she entered the docking bay and saw the extent of the Harmony's damage up close, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this emergency was about to become something much larger and more dangerous than a simple medical rescue mission. The casualties from the Harmony were worse than anyone had anticipated. Sarah worked alongside her medical team to stabilize a young Zelthani father whose crystalline arm structure had been shattered by weapons fire, while nearby teams treated burns, lacerations, and the psychological trauma that accompanied surviving a deliberate attack on defenseless civilians. Captain Elena Vasquez of the Harmony lay in the primary treatment bay, her left leg badly mangled by shrapnel from her ship's damaged bridge. Despite her injuries, she insisted on providing a full report of the attack to Captain Torres and the medical command staff. "They came out of nowhere," Vasquez explained, wincing as Dr. Webb worked to stabilize her damaged limb. 3 vessels, military configuration, but no identification markings. They opened fire without warning or communication. Sarah paused in her treatment of a wounded child to listen to the transport captain's account. The clinical details painted a picture of calculated aggression that sent chills through the medical bay. The attack patterns were designed to disable rather than destroy, Vasquez continued. They targeted our engines and medical bay specifically, like they wanted to leave us helpless but alive. Dr. Webb exchanged a meaningful look with Captain Torres. Attacks designed to disable rather than destroy suggested several disturbing possibilities: piracy, hostage-taking, or worse, the kind of psychological warfare that targeted civilian morale rather than military capability. "Did you get a clear look at the attacking vessels?" Torres asked. Vasquez nodded grimly. Vrake's configuration: Shark-class destroyers with enhanced weapon systems. But they weren't flying Vrake's colors or responding to standard communication protocols. The confirmation of Vrake's involvement cast the entire situation in a new light. While Vrake's military doctrine was notoriously aggressive, direct attacks on civilian transports violated even their warrior culture's codes of conduct. Either this was the work of rogue Vrake's forces acting without authorization, or something larger was developing in this sector of space. Sarah returned her attention to the wounded child in her care, a young Aquarian boy whose breathing apparatus had been damaged in the attack. The sophisticated device that allowed him to survive in the ship's standard atmosphere had been cracked by flying debris, forcing him to rely on emergency backup systems that were failing. "Hold still, little one," Sarah whispered as she worked to repair the breathing apparatus. The delicate biomechanical interface required precise adjustment to match the child's unique physiology. One mistake could prove fatal. The boy's large eyes watched her with a mixture of fear and hope that reminded Sarah why she had chosen medicine as her life's work. In that moment, the politics of the attack faded into background noise. All that mattered was the immediate task of preserving life and alleviating suffering. The repair work required 30 minutes of careful calibration, but finally, the breathing apparatus hummed back to full functionality. The child's color improved immediately as his gills received proper oxygenation, and his translator device chirped out a heartfelt expression of gratitude. Dr. Chun to the bridge, Priority 1, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Sarah completed her immediate care tasks and made her way to the bridge, where she found the senior staff gathered around the tactical display with expressions of growing concern. Long-range sensors have detected multiple Vraksh fleet elements moving into this system, Lieutenant Commander Park reported. Initial counts suggests at least 20 vessels, including heavy cruisers and battleships. The tactical display showed red icons representing Vraksh ships approaching from 3 different vectors, their formation suggesting a coordinated military operation rather than random patrol activity. The size of the fleet was troubling, more than sufficient to overwhelm any Alliance forces in this relatively isolated sector of space. What's the nearest Alliance military presence? Captain Torres asked. Park consulted his communications board before responding. The nearest Alliance fleet is the 3rd Expeditionary Group, currently stationed near the Vega system. Estimated travel time to our position would be 18 hours at maximum speed. 18 hours was an eternity when facing an approaching enemy fleet. The Hippocrates was equipped with defensive systems appropriate for a medical vessel, but nothing capable of standing against Vraksh warships in direct combat. The ship's powerful shields and advanced evasive capabilities were designed to protect patients during emergency evacuations, not to engage in military action. Have we received any communication from the approaching fleet? Torres asked. Negative. They're maintaining communication silence and running with minimal emissions. This is clearly a stealth approach designed to avoid early detection. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as she watched the tactical display. The combination of the Harmony's attack and the approaching Vraksh fleet suggested a coordinated operation targeting civilian vessels and medical facilities. But the motivation remained unclear. What could the Vraksh hope to gain by attacking humanitarian operations? The answer came 6 hours later when the Vraksh fleet dropped out of stealth and began broadcasting on all standard communication frequencies. The transmission source appeared on the main display. Commander Thekvar of the Vraksh Consortium, his scarred reptilian features marked by the ritual scars that indicated his status as a veteran warrior. Attention Alliance vessel. Thekvar's translated voice carried the harsh authority of Vraksh command structure. You are in violation of Consortium territorial claims. Surrender your vessel and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Captain Torres stepped forward, her response measured and diplomatic despite the circumstances. This is Captain Michelle Torres of the Alliance Medical Vessel Hippocrates. We are operating under medical neutrality accords and are currently engaged in humanitarian rescue operations. We claim diplomatic immunity under Alliance Treaty 77 Alpha. The response came immediately, without even a pause for consideration. Medical neutrality is revoked. Your species' weakness disguised as compassion has infected Alliance space long enough. Prepare for boarding or be destroyed. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. The revocation of medical neutrality was unprecedented in Alliance history. Not since the signing of the original accords had any major power openly threatened medical vessels engaged in humanitarian operations. Battle stations, Torres ordered, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the threat they faced. All medical staff, prepare for emergency evacuation protocols. We need to get our patients to safety. The next few hours tested every system and procedure the Hippocrates had developed for emergency operations. Medical teams worked frantically to stabilize patients for potential transfer, while engineering crews prepared the ship's defensive systems. The civilian refugees from the Harmony were integrated into the ship's evacuation plans alongside the existing patient population. Dr. Webb coordinated the medical emergency response with characteristic efficiency. Patients who could be safely moved were transferred to specially designed evacuation pods that could sustain life for days in space. The most critical cases remained in the ship's advanced medical facilities, their lives depending on equipment that couldn't be replicated in emergency shelters. Sarah found herself assigned to Evacuation Pod 7, responsible for 12 pediatric patients whose medical needs required specialized monitoring. The cramped space was equipped with basic life support and medical systems, but nothing approaching the sophisticated care available in the ship's main medical base. The Aquarian boy she had treated earlier was among her assigned patients, his breathing apparatus now functioning perfectly, but still requiring careful monitoring. Despite his young age, he seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, his large eyes tracking the urgent movements of the medical staff with solemn attention. "Are we going to be safe?" asked the young Zelthani patient Sarah had treated in the pediatric ward. Her crystalline features reflected the pod's emergency lighting and patterns that indicated emotional stress. Sarah knelt beside the child's medical station, her voice gentle but confident. "The Hippocrates has the best defensive systems in the Alliance fleet. Captain Torres and her crew will keep us safe." The words were true as far as they went, but Sarah knew the reality was more complicated. The ship's defensive systems were formidable, but they were designed to protect against pirates and accidents, not against a coordinated military assault by 20 Vrake's warships. The first attack came without warning. The Hippocrates shuddered as Vrake's energy weapons struck her shields, the impact sending vibrations through the ship's massive structure. Emergency lighting activated throughout the vessel as the crew responded to the assault with practiced efficiency. On the bridge, Captain Torres coordinated the ship's defense while maintaining open communication with the attacking fleet. Her attempts at diplomatic resolution were met with increasingly aggressive demands for surrender, each ultimatum accompanied by intensified weapons fire. "Shields holding at 80%, reported the tactical officer. "But they're concentrating fire on our engine sections. If they disable our drive systems, we won't be able to escape." Torres nodded grimly. The Vrake strategy was becoming clear: disable the medical ship's mobility, then board and capture along with all patients and crew. The motivation for such an action remained unclear, but the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Launch evacuation pods," Torres ordered. "Get our patients to minimum safe distance before they complete their attack pattern." The evacuation pods ejected from the Hippocrates in carefully coordinated sequences, their small drives carrying them away from the battle zone toward a nebular gas cloud that would provide concealment from enemy sensors. Each pod carried a fragment of the ship's patient population, their lives now dependent on basic life support systems and the hope that Alliance rescue forces would arrive in time. Sarah watched through the pod's small viewport as the Hippocrates grew smaller in the distance. The massive medical vessel's white hull now scarred by weapons fire, but still maintaining its defensive posture. The sight of her ship under attack by vessels bearing the markings of a civilization they had often helped filled her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The Vrake's assault intensified as the evacuation pods cleared the immediate battle zone. Multiple destroyers concentrated their fire on the medical ship's shield generators, while smaller vessels moved to intercept the escaping pods. The coordinated nature of the attack confirmed that this was no random act of piracy. This was a deliberately planned assault on Alliance humanitarian operations. Commander Thekvar's transmission echoed across all communication frequencies as his fleet pressed their attack. "The age of weakness ends today. Your species' infectious compassion will no longer spread through Alliance space. Those who heal will learn the price of defying the strong." The words revealed the true motivation behind the assault. This wasn't about territorial disputes or military advantage. This was an ideological attack on the fundamental principles that humanity brought to galactic civilization. The belief that compassion, healing, and the protection of life were strengths rather than weaknesses. The Hippocrates fought back with everything she had, her defensive systems creating a protective barrier around the evacuating patients, while her communications officers broadcast continuous distress signals toward Alliance space. But 20 Vrake's warships were too much for any single vessel to withstand, regardless of her defensive capabilities. The medical ship's shields finally failed after 40 minutes of continuous bombardment. Vrake's boarding craft immediately launched toward the disabled vessel, while their warships maintained position to prevent any escape attempt. The assault phase had ended. The capture phase was beginning. In Evacuation Pod 7, Sarah worked to keep her young patients calm while monitoring their life support systems. The pod's basic medical equipment was functioning within parameters, but several of her patients required treatments that the emergency systems couldn't provide indefinitely. The Aquarian boy's breathing apparatus was showing signs of strain from the emergency evacuation, its biomechanical components struggling to adapt to the pod's different atmospheric composition. Without access to the specialized equipment aboard the Hippocrates, Sarah could only provide temporary stabilization measures. Dr. Chun, whispered the young Zelthani patient, her crystalline features reflecting emergency lighting in patterns that indicated fear. What's happening to our ship? Through the pod's viewport, Sarah could see the Hippocrates surrounded by Vrake's vessels, their dark hulls forming a menacing constellation around the captured medical ship. Boarding craft moved like insects between the vessels, carrying Vrake's warriors to secure their prize. Sarah's heart broke for her young patients, but her voice remained steady and reassuring. Help is coming. The Alliance knows we're here, and they'll send their fastest ships to bring us home. The words were part hope, part prayer, and part desperate determination to maintain the morale of vulnerable children who depended on her care. But as she watched the Vrake's fleet consolidate their control of the captured medical vessel, Sarah wondered if help would arrive in time. The pod's communication system crackled to life with a transmission from one of the other evacuation pods. DR. Webb's voice carried across the emergency network with characteristic calm authority. All pod commanders, this is Medical Command. Maintain life support protocols and prepare for extended isolation. Alliance forces have been notified and are responding to our distress signal. The message was meant to be reassuring, but Sarah caught the subtext. Extended isolation meant days or weeks before rescue arrived. With their current life support capacity and the medical needs of their patients, many of the evacuation pods wouldn't survive that long. As if sensing her thoughts, the Aquarian boy in her care reached out with his small webbed hand. His translator device conveyed his words with innocent trust. Dr. Chun, will you stay with us? Sarah took the child's hand gently, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. Yes, little one. No matter what happens, I'll stay with you. Around them, 11 other young patients from across the galaxy looked to her for the hope and strength that would carry them through the darkness ahead. In that moment, surrounded by the cold void of space and threatened by forces beyond their control, Sarah understood what it truly meant to be part of humanity's healing mission. The Vrakes might have captured their ship and scattered their medical teams across the void, but they hadn't broken the bonds of care and compassion that connected every member of the Hippocrates crew to their patients. Whatever came next, humanity's commitment to healing would endure. But in the distance, long-range sensors were detecting something that would change everything. Energy signatures, unlike any previously recorded, were approaching the system at impossible speeds, their quantum wake patterns suggesting technology far beyond current Alliance capabilities. Earth's children were coming home, and they were not coming in peace. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship Retribution and felt the cold fury that had been building in his chest since receiving the distress signal from the Hippocrates. 27 years of military service had taught him to control his emotions during combat, but The attack on a medical vessel carrying children crossed lines that activated something primal in the human psyche. The retribution was not like the peaceful medical ships that represented humanity's gentler face to the galaxy. She was 2 kilometers of hardened combat steel, fusion reactors, and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. More importantly, she was the flagship of the Terra Defense Fleet, humanity's true military response to threats against Earth citizens anywhere in the galaxy. Since her report, Kane commanded as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system where the Hippocrates had been captured. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, the ship's tactical officer, consulted her displays with the precision that had made her one of the youngest commanders in fleet history. 23 Vraksh warships in defensive formation around a disabled vessel matching Hippocrates' configuration. Multiple small craft signatures consistent with evacuation pods scattered throughout the system. Kane studied the tactical display with growing anger. The Vraksh had not only attacked a medical vessel, but had also scattered helpless patients across the void in emergency pods. The casual cruelty of leaving sick children to die in space while claiming their ship as a prize embodied everything that made the Vraksh Consortium humanity's natural enemy. Fleet status. Kane asked. 47 vessels reporting ready for immediate action, Rodriguez replied. The Vengeance Battle Group is moving to secure the evacuation pods while Retribution Group prepares for direct engagement with enemy forces. The Earth Defense Fleet that had responded to the Hippocrates distress call represented humanity's most advanced military technology. Unlike the diverse alliance forces that relied on standardized equipment across multiple species, human warships were specifically designed around Earth's unique tactical philosophy. Overwhelming firepower combined with absolute protection of human life. The flagship Retribution mounted gravitational displacement weapons that could tear apart enemy vessels at the subatomic level. Her sister ships carried equally devastating arsenals, quantum torpedo launchers, directed energy cannons powered by stellar core reactors, and defensive systems that could withstand direct hits from planet-killer weapons. But more than technology, the Earth Defense Fleet carried something that other species often failed to understand. The absolute conviction that attacks on human civilians, particularly medical personnel and children, would be answered with total destruction of the aggressor. This wasn't military doctrine or political strategy. It was a promise written into the genetic code of humanity's response to threats. Open a channel to the Vraksh fleet, Kane ordered. The main screen displayed Commander Thekvar's scarred reptilian features, his expression showing the confidence of a predator who believed his prey was helpless. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship displayed the trophies of conquest that marked Vraksh military culture. Weapons taken from defeated enemies, and honor scars earned in countless battles. Human vessels, Thekvar began, his translated voice carrying the arrogance typical of Vraksh military hierarchy. You arrived too late. The medical vessel and its cargo of weakness are now property of the consortium. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of challenging superior forces. Kane's response was delivered with the calm precision of a man stating simple facts. This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Earth Defense Force. You have attacked a medical vessel under protection of the Medical Neutrality Accords. You have endangered children under humanity's care. You have 10 minutes to release all hostages and surrender your vessels for justice. This is your only warning. Thekvar's laughter carried the harsh bark of Vraksh amusement. Your species' obsession with the weak has made you foolish, human. We outnumber your fleet and control the battlefield. Your medical vessel will serve as an example of what happens when compassion overrules strength. The transmission ended, but Kane had expected nothing else. The Vraksh would never surrender, particularly when they believed they held the advantage. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had fundamentally misunderstood what humanity became when children were threatened. All ships, battle stations, Kane commanded. Weapons free. Target priority is rescue of all personnel from the medical vessel and evacuation pods. Rules of engagement. Any Vraish vessel that interferes with rescue operations is to be destroyed immediately. The Earth Defense Fleet moved with the coordinated precision of a force that had trained for exactly this scenario. While the battleships Retribution, Vengeance, and Justice engaged the main Vraish fleet, smaller destroyer and cruiser groups spread throughout the system to locate and secure the scattered evacuation pods. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded the destroyer Mercy's Edge as it raced toward the location of Evacuation Pod 7, where her sensors detected life signs consistent with human medical staff and multiple alien children. The destroyer's advanced medical bay was already prepared to receive patients, its facilities bridging the gap between emergency care and full hospital capability. The pod's life support systems were operating within acceptable parameters, but barely. Dr. Sarah Chen's calm voice responded to the destroyer's communication attempt with professional composure, despite her desperate circumstances. Mercy's Edge This is Dr. Chen aboard Evacuation Pod 7. We have 12 pediatric patients requiring immediate medical intervention. Several cases are critical and cannot survive much longer on emergency life support. Mitchell's response was immediate and reassuring. Copy that, Doctor. We'll have you aboard in 3 minutes. Medical teams standing by for immediate patient transfer. The rescue operation proceeded with the efficiency that marked all Earth Defense Force operations, but it was complicated by the Vraish fleet's attempts to prevent the evacuation pods from being recovered. Enemy fighters moved to intercept the rescue ships, forcing running battles throughout the system as human forces fought to protect their most vulnerable citizens. Aboard the destroyer, Dr. Chen found herself working alongside military medical staff to stabilize her young patients in proper medical facilities. The relief of having adequate equipment and trained assistance was overwhelming, but her attention remained focused on the Aquarian boy whose breathing apparatus required constant adjustment. Doctor, his biomechanical interface is rejecting the ship's atmospheric mixture, reported the destroyer's chief medical officer. We need to establish a proper aquatic environment for extended care. Chen nodded, her hands already working to recalibrate the breathing apparatus for optimal function. The Hippocrates has detailed physiological data for all our patients. If we can recover those medical records. Her words trailed off as she realized the implication. The medical records for thousands of patients were still aboard the captured hospital ship, along with the medical staff who had been unable to evacuate before the Vraish boarding parties arrived. Without those records, many of the alien patients would die even if they were rescued from their emergency pods. Meanwhile, the main battle between the Earth Defense Fleet and the Vraish Consortium was developing with an intensity that surprised observers on both sides. The human warships fought with a combination of technological superiority and tactical aggression that caught the Vraish unprepared for the level of violence humanity could unleash when properly motivated. The Retribution engaged 3 Vraish heavy cruisers simultaneously, her gravitational displacement weapons creating spatial distortions that tore the enemy vessels apart at the molecular level. The sight of ships simply ceasing to exist rather than exploding sent ripples of fear through the Vraish formation as they encountered weapons technology beyond their understanding. Admiral Kane watched the battle develop with grim satisfaction, but his primary focus remained on the captured medical vessel. Long-range scans showed Vraish boarding parties moving through the Hippocrates corridors, rounding up medical staff and patients for reasons that remained unclear. Whatever the enemy intended, Kane couldn't allow it to continue. Justice, and Vengeance form up for medical vessel assault, Kane commanded. Boarding teams prepare for hostile rescue. Rules of engagement. Any threat to medical personnel or patients is to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. The assault on the captured Hippocrates required precision that tested the limits of human military capability. The ship's structure couldn't withstand weapons powerful enough to destroy Vraish warships, while the presence of patients and medical staff meant that combat had to be carefully controlled to prevent civilian casualties. Human boarding teams, equipped with powered armor and advanced weapon systems, breached the medical vessel's hull at multiple points, their movements coordinated through quantum communication networks that prevented enemy interception. The battles that followed were brutal but brief, as human forces encountered Vraksh warriors who had expected to face defenseless medical personnel rather than Earth's elite combat troops. Captain David Park, the communications officer Sarah had spoken with before the attack, led the assault team responsible for securing the pediatric ward. His background in military operations proved invaluable as his team moved through corridors filled with advanced medical equipment and vulnerable alien children. The sight that greeted Park's team in the main pediatric treatment area ignited something primal in the human soldiers. Vraksh warriors had herded dozens of young patients into a central area, their weapons trained on beings whose only crime was requiring medical care. Several children showed signs of rough handling, while others cowered in fear at the armored predators surrounding them. "Stand down immediately," Park commanded through his suit's external speakers. "Release the children and withdraw from this area." The Vraksh squad leader responded by pointing his weapon at a small Zelthani child, his translated words carrying clear threat. "Human soldiers withdraw or child dies. Your species' weakness for young makes you predictable." Park's response was delivered with the cold precision of a man whose patience had reached its absolute limit. Wrong answer. The firefight lasted exactly 12 seconds. When it ended, the Vraksh squad was dead, and the children were unharmed, protected by human soldiers whose training had prepared them for exactly this scenario. Park's team immediately began medical assessment and comfort protocols, their armor's external systems broadcasting soothing sounds and colors designed to calm traumatized children. Similar scenes played out throughout the captured medical vessel as human forces systematically eliminated Vraksh boarding parties while protecting patients and medical staff. The combination of superior training, advanced technology, and absolute motivation made the outcome inevitable, but the cost in stress and trauma to the rescued patients remained high. Dr. Webb found himself working alongside combat medics to provide emergency care in corridors still scarred by weapons fire. The contrast between his peaceful medical mission and the violence required to protect it highlighted the complex reality of humanity's place in galactic civilization. "Doctor, we need your assessment on this patient," called one of the combat medics, gesturing toward a wounded Gorvok elder whose rocky hide showed damage from Vraksh weapons. Webb's examination revealed internal injuries that would require surgery in the ship's advanced medical facilities, but the patient was stable enough for transport. The efficiency of the human rescue operation impressed him even as he worked to treat injuries caused by the attack he had been helpless to prevent. The battle for the Hippocrates concluded with the medical vessel back under human control, but the larger engagement continued as the Earth Defense Fleet systematically destroyed every Vraksh warship that refused to surrender. Admiral Kane had made his position clear. Attacks on medical vessels and children would be answered with complete annihilation of the aggressor force. Commander Thekvar's flagship was the last Vraksh vessel to fall, her destruction coming only after her commander rejected 3 separate surrender ultimatums. The ship's death cry echoed across all communication frequencies as her fusion reactors overloaded, taking with them the military leader who had believed human compassion was weakness rather than strength. As the immediate battle concluded, Kane surveyed the tactical display showing the scattered wreckage of the Vraksh fleet. 23 warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, their crews dead or captured, depending on their willingness to surrender when facing inevitable defeat. But the Admiral's attention was already shifting to the broader implications of the attack. The assault on the Hippocrates had been too well coordinated and strategically planned to be the action of a single rogue commander. This was part of a larger Vraksh strategy, which meant more attacks were likely coming. "Communications, get me a secure channel to Fleet Command," Kane ordered. "We need to discuss the new rules of engagement." The Vraksh have chosen to make medical personnel legitimate targets. They need to understand the consequences of that decision. The rescue and recovery operations continued for 18 hours as human forces located and secured all evacuation pods while restoring the Hippocrates to operational status. Medical teams worked around the clock to provide proper care for patients who had endured emergency conditions far longer than their physiologies could safely tolerate. Dr. Sarah Chun found herself back in her familiar environment aboard the restored medical vessel, but the experience of watching her ship attacked and her patients threatened had changed something fundamental in her perspective. The gentle routine of medical rounds now carried undertones of vigilance and protective instinct that hadn't existed before. The Aquarian boy who had been in her care throughout the crisis approached her during recovery operations, his breathing apparatus now functioning perfectly in the ship's restored medical bay. His translator device conveyed a question that reflected the complexity of his young mind's attempt to understand recent events. "Dr. Chun, why did the bad people want to hurt us? We were only trying to get well." Sarah knelt beside the child, her answer reflecting both medical compassion and the new reality they all faced. Some beings in the galaxy don't understand that helping others makes us strong rather than weak. But there are good people who will always protect those who need healing. The child seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Sarah knew the larger questions raised by the attack would require much more complex answers. The galaxy had seen what happened when humanity's medical mission was threatened, and the implications of that demonstration would reshape galactic politics for decades to come. In the depths of space, coded transmissions raced toward Earth carrying news of the attack and humanity's response. The message was simple but profound. The species that healed with compassion also fought with fury when their values were threatened. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's gentle nature masked something far more dangerous than most civilizations had imagined. The Vraksh Consortium had wanted to demonstrate that compassion was weakness. Instead, they had awakened something that would hunt them across the stars until justice was served. Earth's war machine was stirring to life, and its target was every force that threatened the innocent and helpless under humanity's protection. Fleet Admiral Catherine Reeves stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Alliance Council, her dress uniform bearing the insignia of Earth's highest military command. The massive circular chamber on Nexus Prime had hosted diplomatic sessions for 3 centuries, but never one with stakes quite so high for the future of galactic civilization. The attack on the Hippocrates had sent shockwaves through Alliance space that reached far beyond military circles. Medical vessels from dozens of species had reported increased security concerns, while several member civilizations had begun withdrawing their medical ships from sectors near Vraksh territory. The fabric of humanitarian cooperation that humans had helped weave was unraveling with frightening speed. The assault on Alliance medical vessel Hippocrates represents more than a violation of the medical neutrality accords. Reeves addressed the assembled delegates. It represents a direct challenge to the fundamental principles upon which our alliance was founded: the protection of the innocent and the care of those unable to care for themselves. The Zelthani representative, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's soft lighting and patterns that indicated deep concern, spoke first. "Fleet Admiral, while we all deplore the Vraksh actions, the response by Earth's military forces has caused considerable alarm. The complete destruction of their fleet suggests a level of retaliation that exceeds accepted norms of Alliance military engagement." Reeves had expected this response. Many Alliance species approached warfare with careful calculations of proportional response and strategic advantage. They failed to understand that for humans, attacks on children and medical personnel triggered responses rooted in evolutionary psychology that transcended rational military doctrine. "Honored delegates," Reeves replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years protecting humanity's interests among the stars. Earth's response was both measured and appropriate. The Vraksh fleet was offered multiple opportunities to surrender and release their hostages. They chose destruction over capitulation. The Aquarian delegate's translator device conveyed his musical concerns through the chamber's acoustic systems. The efficiency of Earth's military response suggests capabilities far beyond what humanity has previously demonstrated. Many of our worlds are questioning whether humans have been concealing the true extent of their war-making potential. This was the heart of the crisis that had brought Reeves to Nexus Prime. Humanity had deliberately maintained a public profile emphasizing their medical and humanitarian contributions to the Alliance while keeping their true military capabilities largely hidden. The rescue of the Hippocrates had revealed technology and tactical doctrine that surprised even their closest allies. Earth has never concealed our military capabilities, Reeves responded carefully. We have simply chosen to emphasize our contributions to galactic peace and healing. When circumstances require military action to protect the innocent, we respond with whatever force is necessary to ensure mission success. The Gorvok representative, his stone-like features carved into expressions of concern, spoke with the deep tonal patterns of his species. Fleet Admiral, intelligence reports suggest Earth maintains military installations and fleet bases throughout human space that exceed Alliance treaty limitations. How do you explain this apparent violation of arms control agreements? Reeves paused before answering, knowing that her response would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the Galactic Alliance. The time for diplomatic concealment was ending, replaced by the stark necessity of preparing for a larger conflict that intelligence reports suggested was coming. The installations in question are research facilities and defensive positions protecting human colonies and trade routes, she replied. Earth has always maintained that we reserve the right to defend our citizens by any means necessary. Recent events have validated the wisdom of that policy. Behind the diplomatic language lay a truth that was becoming impossible to hide. Earth had spent the 50 years since first contact building a military infrastructure designed to protect human interests across the galaxy. While publicly emphasizing their medical and humanitarian contributions, they had quietly constructed a war machine capable of challenging any threat to human civilization. The revelation was causing deep concern among Alliance leadership, but not for the reasons many humans had anticipated. Rather than fear of human military power, many delegates were beginning to express hope that Earth's capabilities might be the key to addressing a growing crisis that threatened all Alliance members. Ambassador Keftel of the Elder Council spoke with the measured authority of civilization that had guided galactic affairs for millennia. Fleet Admiral Reeves, recent intelligence suggests the Vrach attack on your medical vessel was part of a broader strategic initiative. Our sources indicate significant consortium military buildup along multiple Alliance borders. We believe they are preparing for large-scale military action. The information aligned with Earth's own intelligence assessments, but hearing it confirmed by the Alliance's most sophisticated intelligence network added urgency to the situation. The attack on the Hippocrates hadn't been an isolated incident. It was the opening move in a war that the Vrach believed they could win through overwhelming force and psychological warfare. What are your intelligence estimates regarding Vrach's military strength? Reeves asked. The Centaurian delegate consulted his data tablet before responding. Conservative estimates suggest the consortium can field approximately 800 warships of various classes, supported by extensive mobile infrastructure and fortress systems. Their recent military expansion has been funded by territorial conquests that have displaced millions of civilians. 800 Vrach warships represented a force capable of overwhelming most Alliance member fleets in direct combat. The traditional Alliance strategy of defensive coalitions and negotiated settlements would be ineffective against an enemy committed to total conquest rather than limited territorial gains. The Alliance Council must face a difficult truth, Reeves said, her words carrying implications that resonated throughout the chamber. The Vrach Consortium has chosen war over diplomacy, conquest over coexistence. They view our humanitarian values as weakness to be exploited rather than strength to be respected. Half measures and defensive postures will not deter an enemy committed to our destruction. The ethereal representative floated forward, her energy-based form flickering with patterns that indicated deep concern. Fleet Admiral, Are you suggesting that the Alliance should abandon diplomatic solutions in favor of preemptive military action? Reeve shook her head. I'm suggesting that the Alliance prepare for the war that the Vrakes have already begun. They attacked a medical vessel carrying children from multiple species. They violated the medical neutrality accords that every civilized nation has sworn to uphold. They have made their intentions clear through actions rather than words. The debate that followed revealed the deep philosophical divisions that had always existed within the Alliance. Species like the Zelthani and Aquarians advocated for continued diplomatic efforts, believing that rational negotiation could resolve even fundamental conflicts. Others, particularly those who had experienced Vrakes aggression firsthand, argued for immediate military mobilization. Ambassador Keftel eventually called for order, her ancient wisdom providing perspective on the crisis they faced. The Elder Council has reviewed all available intelligence regarding Vrakes' intentions and capabilities. We believe Fleet Admiral Reeves' assessment is correct. The Consortium is preparing for general war against Alliance civilizations. The question before us is not whether conflict will come, but how we prepare to meet it. The admission sent ripples of concern through the assembled delegates. If the Elder Council, with their millennia of diplomatic experience, believed war was inevitable, then the situation was far more serious than many had realized. "What does Earth propose?" asked the Gorvok representative. Reeves had been waiting for this question, knowing that her answer would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Earth proposes the formation of a unified Alliance defense force under joint command, with Earth providing strategic coordination and advanced military technology. We also propose the immediate evacuation of all civilian populations from sectors adjacent to Vrakes territory. The scale of what Reeves was suggesting stunned the chamber into silence. A unified Alliance defense force would require unprecedented cooperation between dozens of species with different military doctrines, technologies, and strategic cultures. The evacuation of civilian populations would involve millions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The logistics of such an operation would be enormous, observed the Centaurian delegate. The resources required would strain every Alliance member's capabilities. The alternative, Reeves replied grimly, is allowing those civilian populations to face Vrakes conquest. Intelligence reports from occupied systems paint a clear picture of what that means. Forced labor, cultural destruction, and the elimination of beings deemed inferior by Consortium ideology. The truth of her words was supported by mounting evidence from Alliance intelligence services. Vrakes-occupied worlds showed patterns of systematic oppression that violated every principle the Alliance had been founded to protect. Species that couldn't contribute to the Consortium's war machine were enslaved or eliminated, while their worlds were strip-mined for resources to fuel further military expansion. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been invited to provide medical testimony regarding the attack on the Hippocrates, stood to address the assembly. His presence represented the humanitarian perspective that was at the heart of the crisis. "Honored delegates," Webb began, "as Chief Medical Officer of the Hippocrates, I witnessed firsthand what the Vrakes consider acceptable treatment of children requiring medical care. They held weapons on wounded youngsters, used them as hostages, and showed no concern for their welfare. This is not the behavior of a civilization that can be reasoned with through diplomatic channels." Webb's testimony carried particular weight because his reputation for compassion and medical ethics was known throughout Alliance space. If someone dedicated to healing believed military action was necessary, it suggested the situation had moved beyond normal diplomatic solutions. The debate continued for hours as delegates wrestled with the implications of mobilizing for war against an enemy whose capabilities remained partly unknown. The traditional Alliance approach of careful consensus building seemed inadequate for the speed with which events were developing. Finally, Ambassador Keftel called for a preliminary vote on the formation of a unified defense force. The results reflected the complexity of the situation. A narrow majority favored military preparation, but significant opposition remained from species that feared the consequences of abandoning diplomatic solutions. The vote authorizes the formation of an Alliance Defense Coordination Council, Keftel announced. Fleet Admiral Reeves will serve as military coordinator while maintaining consultation with all Alliance member commands. The civilian evacuation proposal requires further study and planning before implementation. It was less than Reeves had hoped for, but more than she had expected, given the Alliance's traditional reluctance to take decisive military action. The Coordination Council would provide a framework for unified defense planning while respecting the sovereignty concerns of individual member species. As the formal session concluded, smaller groups of delegates gathered to discuss the practical implications of what they had authorized. The Aquarian delegate approached Reeves with questions about Earth's military technology, while the Gorvok representative sought assurances about resource allocation for defensive preparations. But it was Dr. Webb who provided the most sobering perspective as the delegates prepared to return to their home systems. "Fleet Admiral," he said quietly, "in all my years of medical practice, I've learned to recognize when a disease has progressed beyond the point where gentle treatment will suffice. Sometimes the only way to save the patient is through procedures that cause pain in service of a greater healing." Reeves nodded, understanding the metaphor's implications. The galaxy was facing a disease in the form of Vraksh aggression, and gentle diplomatic treatments had failed to halt its spread. The time for surgical intervention was approaching, whether the Alliance was ready for it or not. In the days that followed the Alliance Council session, Earth's diplomatic and military machinery shifted into a coordination mode that surprised even experienced observers. Human fleets began repositioning throughout Alliance space under the cover of joint training exercises, while Earth's industrial capacity ramped up production of advanced military systems. The Hippocrates herself became a symbol of the transformation taking place. While her medical mission continued under enhanced security protocols, she now carried a full complement of Earth Defense Force escorts whose purpose was unmistakably military. The message was clear: humanity's healing mission would continue, but it would be protected by whatever force was necessary. Dr. Sarah Chun found herself working alongside military medical specialists as the ship's role expanded to include preparation for mass casualty scenarios. The quiet efficiency of medical rounds was now accompanied by the subtle presence of security personnel whose job was to ensure that no attack like the Vraksh assault could succeed again. The transformation wasn't limited to military affairs. Earth's diplomatic corps began reaching out to Alliance member species with offers of advanced medical technology, defensive systems, and economic partnerships that would strengthen the bonds between human civilization and their galactic allies. The message Earth was sending was both subtle and unmistakable. Those who stood with humanity in the coming conflict would find themselves stronger and more secure. Those who chose neutrality or opposition would face the galaxy's new reality alone. But in the depths of Vraksh space, similar preparations were underway. Consortium fleets gathered in systems beyond Alliance sensor range, while their leadership planned the next phase of their campaign against what they saw as the weak infection of compassion that humanity had brought to galactic civilization. The attack on the Hippocrates had been intended to demonstrate human weakness. Instead, it had awakened something that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The galaxy was about to discover which vision of civilization would survive: the Vraksh belief in strength through conquest, or humanity's conviction that true power came from protecting those who could not protect themselves. The gathering storm was about to break, and its fury would echo across the cosmos. The war that the Vraksh Consortium had sought to begin with their attack on the Hippocrates came to its climactic conclusion 18 months later in the Rigel system, where the largest space battle in galactic history would determine the future of civilization among the stars. But the battle itself was only the final act of a transformation that had fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout Alliance space. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the Retribution, now flagship of the largest human fleet ever assembled. Around him, tactical displays showed the positions of over 300 Earth Defense Force vessels, their formation perfectly coordinated despite the enormous complexity of managing so many ships across multiple light minutes of space. The fleet represented the culmination of humanity's military buildup following the medical ship attack. Earth's industrial capacity had been fully mobilized for war production, while human colonies throughout the galaxy had contributed resources and personnel to the largest military effort in their species' history. But more than ships and weapons, the fleet carried something that had proven to be humanity's greatest strategic advantage: the absolute conviction that their cause was just. Every crew member understood that they were fighting not for territory or resources, but for the fundamental principle that the innocent deserve protection from those who would prey upon them. Fleet Admiral Reeves sends her compliments, reported Commander Rodriguez. The Alliance Defense Force reports all positions secured and ready for engagement. Kane nodded, studying the tactical situation with satisfaction. The Alliance Defense Force that had been formed in response to the Vraksh threat now included vessels from 17 different species, their diverse technologies integrated through human coordination systems that maximized each civilization's strengths. The Zelthani had contributed their advanced shield technology, while the Aquarians provided superior sensor systems that could track enemy movements across vast distances. The Gorvok fleet brought industrial mining vessels converted to heavy assault ships, their massive frames mounting weapon systems that could crack planet-sized asteroids. But it was the integration of these diverse capabilities under unified command that had transformed the Alliance from a defensive coalition into an offensive force capable of challenging the Vraksh Consortium on their own territory. Human strategic doctrine and command systems had provided the framework that allowed 30 different military traditions to function as a single coordinated entity. "Send a report on enemy positions," Kane requested. "Vraksh Consortium forces are deployed in 3 defensive formations around Rigel Prime," Rodriguez replied. "Initial counts suggests 430 vessels, including their new Devastator-class dreadnoughts. They're using the planet's gravitational field to anchor their defensive positions." The Battle of Rigel Prime represented the Vraksh Consortium's last stand. Their aggressive expansion across Alliance territory had been systematically rolled back by the Unified Defense Force, their conquered worlds liberated, and their fleets destroyed in a series of crushing defeats that had shattered their reputation for invincibility. The campaign had revealed the fundamental weakness in Vraksh military doctrine: their reliance on fear and overwhelming force against divided opponents. When faced with a unified enemy that refused to be intimidated, their tactical flexibility proved inadequate for the complexity of modern space warfare. But Rigel Prime was more than just another military target. Intelligence reports confirmed that the planet served as the primary processing center for millions of Alliance civilians who had been enslaved during the Consortium's expansion. Liberating these populations alive required precision that would test the limits of Alliance military capability. Dr. Webb reports medical facilities are prepared for mass casualty reception, Kane's communications officer announced. The Hippocrates and her escort fleet are standing by to begin humanitarian operations as soon as the system is secured. The presence of the medical vessel that had sparked the conflict carried symbolic importance beyond its practical role in the battle. Dr. Sarah Chun and her medical teams had spent the war treating wounded from dozens of species, their dedication to healing remaining constant even as the galaxy burned around them. The transformation of the Hippocrates from vulnerable medical vessel to the protected heart of humanity's war effort embodied the larger changes that had occurred throughout Alliance space. What had begun as an attack on compassion had awakened a fury that protected healing with overwhelming force. "All ships, this is Admiral Kane," he broadcast on the fleet command frequency. "Today we end the war that began when the Vraksh chose to target children requiring medical care. Today we demonstrate that true strength protects the innocent rather than preying upon them. Today we prove that compassion, backed by righteous fury, is the most powerful force in the galaxy." The battle began with a coordinated assault by Alliance forces that utilized tactics developed through 18 months of constant warfare. Human gravitational weapons created space-time distortions that disrupted Vrakes formations, while Zelthani shield projectors protected advancing squadrons from enemy fire. The Vrakes responded with their traditional doctrine of overwhelming firepower concentrated against specific targets, but their weapons proved inadequate against Alliance defensive systems. The technological advantages they had relied upon for centuries were neutralized by human innovations and the integrated capabilities of a unified fleet. Aboard the Retribution, Kane watched the battle develop with grim satisfaction as Vrakes formations began to break apart under the relentless pressure of Alliance attacks. But his attention remained focused on the planet below, where millions of enslaved civilians awaited liberation. Planetary assault teams report ready, Commander Rodriguez announced. Landing zones have been secured and resistance is minimal. The ground operation that followed the space battle was perhaps the most complex military operation in galactic history. Alliance forces had to distinguish between Vrakes military targets and civilian prisoners while securing processing facilities that held beings from dozens of different species with varying environmental needs. Dr. Chun led the medical teams that accompanied the first wave of ground forces, her experience treating diverse alien physiologies proving invaluable in the chaos of a mass liberation operation. The sights that greeted her in the Vrakes processing centers would haunt her for years to come. Aquarian children whose gills had been damaged by industrial chemicals struggled to breathe in improvised aquatic tanks. Zelthani adults whose crystalline bodies had been cracked by heavy labor lay in primitive medical facilities that provided no real care. Gorvok elders who should have been respected for their age and wisdom were reduced to skeletal frames from inadequate nutrition. Medical Priority 1, Chen announced as her team spread through the liberation zones. Immediate life support for all children and elderly. Secondary priority for adults with critical injuries. We save everyone we can. The medical operation that followed liberation demonstrated humanity's approach to post-conflict healing on a massive scale. Mobile hospitals were established within hours of planetary capture, while advanced medical ships provided specialized care for the most severely injured survivors. But more than physical healing, the liberation revealed the psychological trauma that Vrakes occupation had inflicted on entire populations. Civilizations that had known peace for centuries had been exposed to systematic brutality designed to break their spirit and eliminate their cultural identity. The recovery process would take years, but Alliance medical teams began immediately with trauma counseling programs tailored to the psychological needs of different species. Human understanding of emotional healing proved as valuable as their technological medical advances in helping entire populations recover from the nightmare of Vrakes occupation. The battle itself concluded with the surrender of the remaining Vrakes fleet after their command structure collapsed under the coordinated Alliance assault. Commander Thekmore, the new consortium leader who had replaced his predecessor killed in the Hippocrates rescue, appeared on the main screen of the Retribution to formally surrender his forces. Admiral Kane, the Vrakes commander, said, his scarred features showing the exhaustion of a warrior whose entire worldview had been shattered by defeat. The consortium requests terms for unconditional surrender. We acknowledge the superiority of Alliance forces and accept whatever justice you deem appropriate. Kane's response reflected the transformation that the war had brought to human civilization. The species that had entered galactic society emphasizing diplomacy and healing had been forced to become something harder and more dangerous, but their core values remained unchanged. The terms are simple, Kane replied. Complete disarmament of all Vrakes military forces. Reparations to be paid to all species harmed by your conquests. War crimes trials for all personnel involved in attacks on civilian populations. And permanent monitoring to ensure compliance with galactic law. The surrender of the Vrakes consortium marked the end of the largest military conflict in Alliance history, but it also marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. The unified defense force that had been created to fight the war remained intact, its success having demonstrated the advantages of coordinated military action under human strategic leadership. Dr. Webb found himself appointed as Director of Galactic Medical Operations, overseeing the expansion of human medical philosophy throughout Alliance space. The principles that had guided the Hippocrates mission, universal care, species-blind compassion, and the treatment of healing as a moral imperative, became the standard for medical practice throughout the galaxy. Sarah Chun received appointment as Chief Medical Coordinator for the newly established Alliance Refugee Recovery Program. Her experience treating diverse species under extreme conditions, making her uniquely qualified to oversee the healing of entire populations traumatized by war. The young patients who had been aboard the Hippocrates during the original attack became symbols of what the Alliance was fighting to protect. The Aquarian boy whose breathing apparatus Chun had repaired grew up to become a doctor himself, dedicating his life to the medical mission that had saved him. The Zelthani child who had asked why bad people wanted to hurt them became a counselor specializing in trauma recovery for war orphans. But perhaps the most significant change was the transformation of humanity's role within galactic civilization. The species that had joined the Alliance as healers and diplomats had proven themselves capable of decisive military action when their values were threatened. This combination of compassion and strength created a new model for galactic leadership that other species began to emulate. The Vraksh attack on the Hippocrates had been intended to demonstrate that compassion was weakness. Instead, it had awakened something that reshaped the fundamental balance of power among stars. The galaxy learned that those who dedicated themselves to healing could also fight with terrible fury when the innocent were threatened. In the years that followed, the rebuilt Vraksh civilization slowly reformed under Alliance guidance, their warrior culture evolving to emphasize protection of the weak rather than conquest of the defenseless. It was a difficult transformation, but one that demonstrated the possibility of redemption even for civilizations that had embraced darkness. The Hippocrates continued her mission throughout the galaxy, but now she traveled with permanent escort fleets whose presence ensured that no enemy would ever again dare to threaten those under her care. The medical ship that had been attacked for showing mercy had become the protected symbol of civilization's commitment to healing. Dr. Chen often returned to the observation lounge, where she had watched the Vraksh fleet approach so many months before. But now, instead of enemy warships, the view showed Alliance vessels from dozens of species working together to build something better than what had come before. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect. The species that healed with gentle hands also fought with righteous fury, and in that combination of compassion and power lay the foundation for a civilization worthy of the stars themselves. The war that began with an attack on Mercy had ended with the triumph of everything Mercy represented. And throughout the galaxy, wherever beings suffered or struggled or needed healing, the children of Earth stood ready to offer their aid, protected now by the unshakable knowledge that their compassion was backed by the most powerful force in the universe. The righteous anger of those who refused to let evil triumph over innocence. The cosmos itself had been reminded of an ancient truth, that in the end, love backed by unbreakable will always defeat hatred, no matter how powerful or determined that hatred might be. The galaxy was a safer place for children, and that was worth any price that had been paid to achieve it.